My name is Jason, and for the longest time, I thought ghost stories were nothing more than tall tales people told to scare each other. I grew up in a family that believed in hard facts and evidence, so anything that couldn't be explained by science was dismissed as imagination or coincidence. I carried that mindset into adulthood, into every aspect of my life, including my job as a security guard. After all, what's a ghost compared to a real-life intruder? But sometimes, reality has a way of shaking even the most logical minds. I've worked the night shift at plenty of places over the years, hospitals, factories, office buildings, and nothing ever fazed me. I liked the quiet, the solitude. It gave me time to think and, truthfully, to relax. Most nights, the biggest excitement was catching a raccoon near the dumpsters or escorting a drunk trespasser off the property. So when I got assigned to the Eastwood building, I didn't think much of it. The Eastwood building wasn't particularly old, but it had a strange energy about it. It was one of those places where the air always felt a little too still, like it was holding its breath. The building had been converted from an old government office into private rentals, housing various businesses that used the space during the day. By the time my shift started at 9 p.m., it was usually empty. I remember my first night there vividly. The building was massive, with endless hallways and identical doors that made it feel like a maze. My supervisor gave me a quick tour, pointing out the key areas I needed to monitor: the lobby, the stairwells, and especially the third-floor corridor. "Just keep an eye on that floor," he said with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. When I asked why, he just shrugged and muttered something about the lights acting up. At first, I didn't think much of it. I've dealt with plenty of faulty wiring in older buildings, and the third-floor corridor seemed no different. The lights flickered occasionally, and the air was noticeably colder, but I assumed it was just poor maintenance. Still, something about that hallway made me uneasy. It was too quiet even for an empty building. The corridor itself was long and narrow, lined with offices that hadn't been used in years. Most of the doors were locked, their paint peeling and their doorknobs tarnished. The walls were a dull beige, the kind of color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Walking through it gave me the distinct feeling of being watched, though I knew it was just my imagination. Or so I thought. During my first week, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I walked my rounds, checked the locks, and logged my observations like clockwork. But every time I passed through the third-floor corridor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the flickering lights or the cold air. It was the silence. It was too heavy, too complete, like the hallway was holding its breath. By the second week, I started noticing little things. Shadows that didn't belong to me flickered at the edge of my vision. Faint creaks and taps echoed down the hall. But when I turned to look, nothing was there. Once, I swore I heard a door handle jiggle as I walked past, but every door was securely locked when I checked. I told myself it was nothing, just the quirks of an old building settling into the night. I didn't mention it to my supervisor or anyone else. After all, what could I say? I think the hallway doesn't like me. They'd have laughed me out of the job. Then there was the smell. It came out of nowhere one night, a faint but unmistakable scent of damp earth and decay. It lingered in the air, clinging to my clothes and following me as I walked through the corridor. It was the kind of smell that made your stomach turn, like something rotting just out of sight. I started to dread my rounds, especially when they brought me to the third floor. I began rushing through the corridor as quickly as I could, my flashlight darting around nervously. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following me. By the end of my third week, the unease had settled deep in my bones. I started to feel like the corridor was watching me, waiting for something. My sleep was restless, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and whispered voices I couldn't understand. I told myself it was just stress, but deep down I knew it was more than that. I began to notice patterns. The shadows always appeared at the same time, just after midnight. The faint creaks and taps would grow louder as I neared the end of the corridor, almost as if they were trying to guide me somewhere. And the smell, it was strongest near a particular door, one I hadn't paid much attention to before. The door in question was unremarkable, like all the others in the corridor. It was locked, and according to the building's records, it hadn't been used in decades. But there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. One night, as I passed the door, I thought I heard a faint whisper coming from inside. It was so soft I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it at all. But then it came again, louder this time, though I couldn't make out the words. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I pressed my ear to the door. The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence that made my ears ring. I stepped back, heart pounding, and hurried down the corridor without looking back. That was the first time I truly felt afraid. I tried to avoid the third floor as much as possible after that, lingering on the lower levels and taking extra time with my rounds. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the sense of unease. The corridor was always there, waiting for me, its secrets hidden in the shadows. That was when I realized the building wasn't just old, it was alive. It breathed, it watched, and it remembered. And it wanted something from me. The cold night air whipped around me, offering a stark contrast to the oppressive heat that had enveloped me within the confines of the Eastwood building. I leaned against the brick wall, my chest heaving as I struggled to regain my composure. The adrenaline coursing through my veins began to subside, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. I replayed the events of the night in my mind, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. The figure, the whispers, the eerie silence, it all seemed too surreal, too terrifying to be real. Yet, the physical sensations, the cold touch, the chilling whispers, were all too vivid. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had barely escaped with my life. The woman, or whatever it was, had seemed intent on dragging me into the darkness, into a realm beyond human understanding. The thought of what might have happened had I succumbed to its grasp sent shivers down my spine. I decided to report the incident to my supervisor, but I knew that no one would believe me. The building had a reputation for strange occurrences, but they were always dismissed as urban legends or the product of overactive imaginations. I doubted anyone would take my story seriously, especially given the lack of physical evidence. Despite the skepticism, I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that something truly sinister was lurking within the walls of the Eastwood building. I resolved to investigate further, to uncover the truth behind the haunting presence. But I knew that I would have to be cautious, to tread carefully, and to always be prepared for the unexpected. The next day, I returned to the Eastwood building, armed with a voice recorder and a renewed sense of determination. I retraced my steps, revisiting the corridor where I had encountered the figure. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, and the shadows seemed to dance and shift in the dim light. I activated my voice recorder and began to speak, describing the events of the previous night. As I spoke, I listened intently for any unusual sounds, any whispers or murmurs that might betray the presence of the unseen. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the building's machinery. I approached the door to the room where I had encountered the figure. The scratches on the door were still visible, a stark reminder of the terrifying ordeal. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew that what lay beyond the door was dangerous, perhaps even deadly. But I was determined to face my fears and uncover the truth. With a deep breath, I turned the doorknob and slowly opened the door. The room was dark and musty, the air thick with the stench of decay. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was empty, save for a single, dilapidated chair sitting in the corner. As I moved closer to the chair, I noticed something strange. The chair was covered in a fine layer of dust, but there were distinct handprints on the armrests, as if someone had recently sat there. I reached out to touch the chair, but I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, almost sinister. Suddenly, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping across the room. But there was nothing there. The room was still, silent and empty. I turned back to the chair, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to touch the armrest, I felt a cold, clammy hand grab my wrist. I screamed, jerking my hand away. The chair seemed to move, as if it was alive. I stumbled backward, crashing into a nearby table. The table overturned, sending a cascade of papers and books scattering across the floor. In the chaos, I managed to grab my flashlight and turn to run. But as I turned, I saw it, the figure standing in the doorway, its face contorted in a grotesque grin. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could. I burst out of the room and down the corridor, the figure in hot pursuit. I could hear its heavy footsteps pounding behind me, growing louder with each passing moment. I reached the end of the corridor and burst out into the stairwell. I raced down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the figure's presence behind me, its icy breath brushing against my neck. I finally reached the ground floor and burst out of the building, gasping for air. I looked back at the Eastwood building, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. I knew that I would never return to that place, that I would never forget the horrors that I had witnessed within its walls. The experience had changed me forever. I was no longer the same person I had been before. The fear, the terror, the sheer horror of what I had encountered had left an indelible mark on my soul. Yet, despite the trauma, I was determined to uncover the truth. I would not rest until I had solved the mystery of the Eastwood building. The days that followed were a blur. I spent countless hours researching the history of the building, poring over old documents and newspaper articles. I interviewed former employees, local historians, and anyone who might have any information about the strange occurrences that had plagued the building. I discovered that the Eastwood building had a dark and troubled past. It had been built on the site of an old cemetery, and rumors persisted that the building was haunted by the spirits of those who had been buried there. Some people claimed to have seen ghostly figures wandering the halls, heard unexplained noises, and experienced inexplicable feelings of dread. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to piece together a disturbing picture. The figure I had encountered was not a figment of my imagination, but a real, tangible entity. It was a malevolent spirit, trapped within the walls of the Eastwood building. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the building, determined to confront the evil that lurked within. I prepared myself mentally and spiritually, knowing that the encounter would be dangerous. I equipped myself with a variety of tools, including a powerful flashlight, a voice recorder, and a protective amulet. As I entered the building, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to dance and shift. I moved cautiously through the corridors, my senses heightened. I eventually reached the room where I had encountered the figure. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was still and silent, but I knew that the evil was lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing my flashlight. I was plunged into darkness, my heart pounding with fear. I could hear a low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows. I reached for my lighter, fumbling in the darkness. Finally, I managed to ignite the flame. The room was illuminated, but the figure was gone. I let out a sigh of relief, but I knew that the danger had not passed. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. I screamed, trying to pull my foot free. The figure emerged from the shadows, its face contorted in a grotesque grin. I reached for my lighter, fumbling in the darkness. Finally, I managed to ignite the flame. The room was illuminated, but the figure was gone. I let out a sigh of relief, but I knew that the danger had not passed. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. I screamed, trying to pull my foot free. The figure emerged from the shadows, its face contorted in a grotesque grin. A battle ensued, a struggle between good and evil. I fought with all my might, using every ounce of strength and determination. In the end, I managed to overpower the figure, banishing it back to the darkness from whence it came. Exhausted and terrified, I fled the Eastwood building, leaving behind the darkness and despair. I had faced the evil, and I had emerged victorious. But the experience had taken its toll, leaving scars on my soul. In the days that followed, I sought solace in the company of loved ones. I shared my experiences with them, seeking comfort and understanding. They listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me began to subside. I learned to live with the knowledge that evil exists, but that it can be overcome. I also learned the importance of hope, courage, and perseverance. The experience had changed me forever. I was no longer the same person I had been before. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and I knew that I could face any challenge that life threw my way. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and I knew that I could face any challenge that life threw my way. The experience had instilled in me a deep sense of purpose and a desire to help others. I wanted to use my knowledge and experience to protect others from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. I began to research paranormal activity, studying the history and folklore of hauntings and demonic possessions. I learned about various techniques for cleansing and purifying spaces, as well as methods for protecting oneself from malevolent spirits. I also started to volunteer at a local paranormal investigation team. I joined them on their investigations, assisting them in documenting evidence and conducting paranormal experiments. Through these experiences, I gained valuable knowledge and skills, and I developed a deep understanding of the supernatural. As my reputation as a paranormal investigator grew, I began to receive calls from people seeking help with their own paranormal experiences. I would visit their homes, businesses, and other locations, conducting thorough investigations and offering advice on how to protect themselves from harm. I also started a blog and a YouTube channel where I shared my experiences and knowledge with others. I discussed various paranormal phenomena such as ghosts, poltergeists, and demonic entities. I also provided tips on how to protect oneself from harm and how to conduct paranormal investigations safely. Through my work, I have helped countless people who were struggling with paranormal activity. I have helped to cleanse haunted homes, exorcise demonic entities, and protect people from harm. I have also helped to debunk myths and misconceptions about the paranormal, promoting a more rational and evidence-based approach to understanding the unexplained. My experiences have taught me that the world is a mysterious and often terrifying place. But it is also a place of wonder and beauty. By facing our fears and embracing the unknown, we can unlock the secrets of the universe and discover our true potential. The experiences I had at the Eastwood building have shaped me into the person I am today. They have taught me the importance of courage, resilience, and perseverance. They have also taught me the importance of empathy, compassion, and understanding. I have learned that the world is full of mystery and wonder, and that there is always more to discover. I have also learned that fear is a powerful force, but it can be overcome. By facing our fears, we can grow stronger and more resilient. I am grateful for the experiences I have had, both good and bad. They have shaped me into the person I am today, and I would not trade them for the world.